Buddy, David Tallman back here with you. It is another edition of the Rant Network. So glad to be back with you here. And unfortunately, I'm still alone. Stuart is still away, and hopefully he will be back on Friday, bigger and badder than ever. Unfortunately, he is out, but I'm, manning the ship for the time being. Thank you so much for joining us. And thank you to all those new listeners who are coming in. And I got to tell you, we're growing. We're growing exponentially, and we love it. And if this is your first time, welcome. It's a podcast normally hosted by myself, David Solomon, and Stuart Pascal, where we bring you literally unfiltered, uncensored conversations on a wide variety of topics. US, Canada, international, you name it, doesn't make a difference. We're dedicated to giving you a platform simply to express your opinions, share your thoughts, experiences, ideas, and hear from a variety of different perspectives and simply honest, unfiltered, uncensored, unedited opinions. Unedited is the key as we are live. Join us as we dive into the latest news, pop culture, politics, so much more. We get into the absurdity of modern life to real serious issues that are deep and affect us every single day. We've got you covered. Sit back, relax, enjoy. Here we are noon live. And if you're listening to us on a recording, we're hoping you're enjoying us, whether it's live, whether it's a recording on video, YouTube, Rumble, whatever, or a podcast. Welcome. So here's the crazy thing. I, along with Stuart, have ranted numerous times about where the media just continues to just go wrong. And go wrong, not just go wrong in general, but go wrong as you and me. Because it used to be that the media was a reliable source of information. It used to be that if you wanted to know what was going on, you had this third party who came and brought you information to your doorstep, you name it, wherever, and you could rely upon it. And Stuart talked about Walter Cronkite in his day, and there were other journalists that really, if you talk about integrity and if you talk about what they brought to the table, it was phenomenal. But unfortunately, we're not dealing in that world today. What we're dealing with in a world today is of biased media, and of media who likes to then point the finger at the other and where they're wrong. And if you haven't seen it till now, it's you got the Fox News pointing the fingers at the CNNs and the MSNBCs and vice versa, and they all accuse each other of fake news, false news, all kinds of other things, and misleading and what have you. But they're generally on opposites end of the political divide, if you will. Rarely do you ever hear of a media going after another media in the same sphere. So, which is why it was surprising when I read the National Post, one of Canada's national papers, that I was actually pleasantly surprised to see someone pointing the fingers at, yes, the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, our publicly funded CBC. Now, the CBC is supported entirely by your taxpayers, ladies and gentlemen. Yeah, they get some ad revenue and some of that comes in. But if they had to be private, they'd fail mercilessly. Now, in all fairness to the CBC, to get that public funding, they got a lot of things that they got to do. They have regional stations that they have to support. They have Canadian programming that they have to put out there. There's a lot of things that they have to do in order to get that money, and that's not easy. And if they were a private broadcaster, they'd probably shut down God knows how many stations, and God knows how much Canadian content would disappear. So I can't completely crap all over the CBC in that they are, in terms of achieving their mandate. But here was the problem. Here's where I've got a real frustration. The CBC has to serve the people, and it doesn't. What it's serving is its own survival rather than than you and me. Now, a lot of people confuse the CBC with PBS in the United States and BBC in the UK. The BBC in the UK, yes, is publicly funded, but it's like a mega arm, and doesn't have the limitations, and it's just the mega arm. By contrast, PBS, publicly funded also, but supported by private money and foundations and what have you, and they can do certain programming and they have certain controls and what have you, and they don't have restrictions to the government. So the CBC is kind of this weird hybrid. And CBC provides news, right? If it's on radio and TV, it's a news source. And you would think that it would give you the right news. But it doesn't. And here's where it failed us recently. I spoke about the scandal, which doesn't seem to want to get legs partly because of the CBC, in terms of the election interference by the CCP, the Canadian, should be the Canadian, but the Chinese Communist Party. Justin Trudeau, we've talked about, avoided the topic, claimed it didn't happen, was called out, and then finally had to admit that, yeah, there could be a problem and we should investigate and research it. But why am I bringing this up? Is because the National Post called out the CBC for coming to Trudeau's defense over the scandal. They, according to this article, shamelessly pushing the narrative that the concerns about Chinese election interference is, get this, racist. The R word is back in play. The R word is in play. Racist. The best way to deflect is calling someone or something racist. And this is the National Post calling out CBC on their bluff. Now, when this thing first came out, CBC hardly gave it the time of light. Hardly gave it any sign of life that there could be a horrific scandal on our hands, that China interfered in our election, and CBC went, not a news story. Sound familiar? We've seen this with other media. But CBC simply went out of their way to make sure that this is not gonna get any legs. They called it inaccurate. And then at the same time, just as momentum started to grow, who can we attack? Let's see now. Who hates the CBC? Oh, yes, the Conservative Party of Canada. Because the Conservative Party of Canada wants to cut CBC funding and wants it to be more accountable. And we can't have that. God forbid. So the CBC said, hey, you know what? Let's make Pierre Poilievre, the leader of the Conservative Party, our scapegoat. And let's make him into the lunatic fringed guy that we want him to be. The Conservatives are just blowing things out of proportion to manipulate you. That's the message that CBC is delivering. In fact, the only person that they focused on throughout this entire thing was Poilievre's usual, as they put it, mission to discredit the Liberals. And this is it. It's a Poilievre conspiracy. Don't believe me? Read the article in the National Post. It's great. The headline at the end was Poilievre accuses Trudeau of ignoring election interference by China. Pierre Poilievre. Just Pierre. Nobody else. Really? None of the opposition parties? Nobody else? None of nobody? That's the CBC for you. That, ladies and gentlemen, is what the CBC is doing. It is interfering in your fact-finding. They pushed this whole narrative of fake news. And I know this sounds so Trump-like in what I just said, but do you see why politicians are really starting to wonder about media? This agenda-based media, it is clear that the CBC doesn't want the Conservatives to win the next election. It is clear that the CBC is doing its utmost to discredit the Conservatives. And how do you do that? By either making the scandal non-existent or blaming the Conservatives and trying to pin it on them that it's a bunch of crazy allegations. They did the same thing with the Freedom Convoy. They've done the same thing in other places. The CBC is the propaganda machine for the Liberal Party, as much as it's to give Trudeau whatever he needs, but for CBC's survival. Folks, the CBC is taking your money and putting it in their pockets. Because about a month ago, it was reported that the broadcaster handed out, get this, $30 million in bonuses during COVID. That the number of employees making 6 digits have doubled in 7 years. Right? Massive increase. Massive increase. 115% more employees got no less than $100,000 in salary. Now you could say, David, listen, it's about competition. We need to give money. I get the salary maybe, but the bonuses, 30 million of your taxpayer money that we need to pay down a deficit that we need for public funding. The CBC should get this money more than any other cause in this country. Seriously? That's where it should be? The Liberals just had their budget yesterday and not a cent of cuts to the CBC. But there were all these programs that need money in the millions and billions of dollars, and yet it's not a cent is being reallocated from the CBC, I don't want to say the Communist Broadcasting Corporation, but why the hell not? Thank you so much to the CBC. They receive a $1.2 billion. That's B with a billion with a B in funding. 1.2. And what are they doing? Pushing the liberal agenda, distorting facts. Now, they do a lot of other good things, and I would love to have that. But when Pierre Poilievre is saying, for crying out loud, we need better accountability to CBC because this propaganda machine is not good for Canadians, hard to say no. Whether you're on the conservative side, the NDP side, or the liberal side, I don't care where you are. Yes, the CBC loves to push certain things and very good reporting in some cases. But they're lying to you, folks. Thank you to the CBC for lying and covering up yet another Trudeau scandal. But in this case, this is international interference. You went ballistic, CBC, when you alleged that Donald Trump and the Russians colluded on election. You lost your mind, called it the greatest threat to democracy, and went report after report after report after report after report on Donald Trump and his collusion with Russia and Putin's interference and blah, 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 blah. You even talked about the potential of it being now with the Chinese party. But in Canada, because it affects Justin and the $1.2 billion that you're getting annually, let's bury the story and let's hide the truth from Canadians. Let's distort the fact so that our survival doesn't get impacted. Isn't that beautiful? Isn't that a great way for your taxpayers' money to be at work? $1.2 billion. That's right. That's money you have given to the government in taxes. It's great. When Pierre Poilievre, whom I've met, and we've had this conversation a few times in a public setting, he's not saying I want to kill the CBC. He kept using the word accountable. He kept saying, I don't want them to just run amok. It's time for them to do their job properly. And if they can't, let's change it. Well, if you haven't had enough proof to believe that there should be a change at CBC, then this CCP scandal, this election interfering thing, should give you nothing but pure validation. The CBC, its days are numbered. And if they don't fix it, they will be canceled. And I will have no issues canceling them. Ladies and gentlemen, that's it for today. Really hope you've enjoyed tuning in, listening to the Rant Network. Stuart should be back on Friday. I hope you enjoyed some of this and gained some valuable insights and perhaps maybe think about it, go back to your, an MP or talk to people and say, what do we do about the CBC and other things? Look, we appreciate your support, folks, and we hope you'll join us again for the next edition of the Rant Network, where we get into more thought-provoking conversations. We're here Monday, Wednesday, Friday, noon Eastern live. But again, you can download our podcasts. You can watch it on YouTube and Rumble and other sources. Meantime, don't forget, follow us on social media. Click us on Facebook. We're there. We're on Twitter. We're all over the place. And remember, send us your feedback. We love it. We want to hear what you'd like to hear. On that note, ladies and gentlemen, thanks for listening. And until next time,